This is video number 18. It's also the third one in stage 7, and we'll see, maybe it's the last one in this app for building our Drive app. In the previous video, number 17, we got to step 18. I know the numbers are confusing, where we created like a crowd sound, and now we're on, just to make sure again, we are on stage 7 and we're on step 19. We're going to create two objects to detect the start of a loop, of a lap, and the finish. It's not the same one, because when it's like starting is a start line, the fact that the finish line is almost at the same spot is not, that's not important, because the finish line has a different function. The finish line's function is to detect that something came back across the lap or around the lap. So this is why there's going to be two objects that are going to be very close to one another, but they're still going to be separate. So we're going to start by creating a cube as a child of hold track, one more part for hold track, and its name is going to be start trigger, and we're going to give it the following. So hold track, one more child, one more cube. Its name is going to be start trigger. And of course, right now it's just a cube without any material or anything like that. 0, 101, 4.31. So let's move things aside to be able to see that. Okay. 0. 101.5, that's, way up in the air, just like the rest of the track. And 4.31, which means it's actually kind of in the middle of the car. And no rotation. It's going to be 5 meters wide. See how it's like almost blocking the car. 2.8 meters tall. And 0.2 meters thick. It's like I built a wall, but it's not just in front of the car. If I look from above at this start trigger, it's exactly like a few inches, a few centimeters away from the front bumper, and right between the gate and the front bumper. In other words, in order to open the gate, I'll have to go right through that. The thing is, before we even continue, I noticed, and this is totally a matter of taste, that right now the shadows are a little too pronounced. You can leave them the way they are, but if you think like me, I can always go back to the directional light and just reduce the strength of the shadow. And I like it like about half. Back to this. In its box collider, that start trigger, we're going to check is trigger. What does that mean? That we don't really want to bump into it. We're going to want to go right through it. But if we collide with it, we want it to trigger an action, as if it was like, air or, a ghost. We've done this before. So let's make sure that the start trigger, its box collider, is checked as trigger. Then, so now it looks like we have a wall just in front of the front bumper. We already saw that. We're going to check start trigger's mesh render, so it becomes invisible. I don't want to see it. It has a function, it's there, but it's invisible. So mesh render, invisible. Next, we're going to duplicate it and call it finish trigger. Start trigger, edit, duplicate, name, finish trigger, and notice what we're going to give finish trigger. Very similar to start trigger, but its position, instead of 4 point something, is going to be 3. So if I enable it, if I enable its mesh renderer, look at where it is right now. It's in the middle of the car. So See, they're a little far away from each other. To start, the front bumper will touch the start trigger and start the lap. And when we come around, it's going to touch the finish trigger and signify the end of a lap. And you'll see that they're actually these two objects. Let me make this one also invisible. Only one of them will be active at any time. So we start with start trigger active, but finish trigger is inactive. As it says in the guide, very important to disable it. So not only is it invisible, now initially it's also disabled. Now, just like I said, the start trigger is enabled, but the finish trigger is disabled. But you cannot see even the start trigger because its mesh renderer of both of them are off. So, yep, start trigger, finish trigger, there. Then we're going to create a script in my scripts folder. It's going to be called start trigger script with an exact name, capital S, capital T, capital S, and we're going to attach it to the start trigger. You're going to delete the default code and instead type this. So I'm assuming you're pausing right now this video in order to type the code. I already did. And if you rejoin the video, that means that you type the code, and let's go over it. First of all, I'm going to attach it. I have a start trigger script that belongs to start trigger. Opening it in my code editor. It's not a big script. And even while it opens, let's think of its job. Its job is to sense that something is touched or triggered. The trigger, the front, the start trigger. That something is the front bumper and not something else. In other words, like the touching part of the car. To tell the game that we started. To make the start sound, oh yeah, the start sound needs to play, which means I was right in the previous one where the sound needs to be, I'm going to go back here, it's going to be, right here, uncheck, play on awake. I just remembered that I want the sound to play only when we swing open the doors. Which means I'm going to go back to that sound. So my apologies for doing this before. Start sound is not going to be play on awake. Not that it makes that much of a difference. In other words, it's going to wait for me to drive forward to play the sound. Back to the script. So let's see what the job of the script is. The public class is called start trigger script. The first public object we declare is start sound, or in other words, what sound do you want me to start when something happens? And also one more public object, which is the finish trigger, because as soon as the start trigger senses a collision, it will disable itself and enable the finish trigger. Then there's no start. There's no update. There's only on trigger enter. Remember, we checked on those two cubes. They're both on their box collider. We checked is trigger. Let's make sure of that. So both the start trigger is trigger and the finish trigger is trigger. Going back to start trigger. On trigger enter, collider is of course the function or the event that happens. Who touched is the object that enabled, that called it. So the first thing it's asking is like, who touched me? If who touched dot game object dot name, not tag but name, is front bumper, and this is why it's essential that the name of the front bumper is front bumper, capital F, capital B, spelled exactly that way. That will be a good time to check that. I'm going to go back to the player back to the vehicle and make sure that my front bumper is named front bumper so it recognizes it. If it's different by even one character, and sometimes it's really hard, especially if I add like a space inadvertently and click somewhere else, it will be really hard to see that I have an extra character, but it'll still mean, let me delete that space, it will not recognize it as being equal to that name. So let's make sure that it's really named front bumper, going back to the script. So if it's the front bumper of the car and it crossed the trigger, first of all, while I was developing, I wanted to make sure that it senses it, so I print gate in the console, but I don't need that anymore. Then it's going to play the sound, play the start sound, the crowd. It's going to go to its buddy, the finish trigger, and say, hey, I'm disabling myself. I'm going to set you active to true, and then myself, this object set active, false. So disabling itself off until the next round. And the three curly brackets are to end the if it's the front bumper, end the on trigger function, and end the class. Back to the guide. In the inspector of start trigger script, we're going to assign the public fields to start sound and the finish trigger. So, since it has two public fields, right here, start sound will be start trigger itself because it has an audio. Why not? Let's see. I thought I gave it an audio. Oh, start sound, not start trigger, start sound. And finish trigger is finish trigger. Now, even though it's disabled, it can still be cast as the finish trigger. So start sound, the object, and finish trigger, the object. Next. Start sound and finish trigger. Then we're going to create one more script. It's going to be our last script for this app. It's going to be called finish trigger script. We're going to attach it to finish trigger, which is still disabled, but it will get a script. We're going to delete the default code and instead type these lines. Again, no more than 20-25 lines. I already did, so I'm assuming you are pausing this video so you can create the script. Make sure that you give it the exact name. Finish trigger script, capital F, capital T, capital S, and attach it to finish trigger, even though finish trigger is still disabled. Again, by add component or writing a script and dragging it one way or another. Here's finish trigger script that I already wrote. And I'm going to double click to open it. And let's see what the job of the finish trigger is. Again, it's the script of this little invisible wall that's called finish trigger script. The two variables that we're declaring is one public game object start trigger, because just like the start trigger disabled itself and enabled the finish, when the finish is triggered, it's going to disable itself and enable the start trigger. It's going to toggle between them. Or in other words, who do I activate when when we finish, so we can start a new round. Then, just like the start, it has only one big function: on trigger enter. When something triggers it. And of course, just like before, it's asking if who touched me, .gameObject.name is front bumper. If the front bumper touched the finish, yay, we finished a lap. So look at what happens when we finish a lap. First of all, we go to the application data. Remember, the application data is part of the drive main script, and we inform it that we completed one more lap. The lap count at the very beginning is 0. But if we finish a lap, it's going to go plus plus. No, it's going to be 1, and it's going to show up on the dashboard of the car. Then it's asking, did we beat our own best lap? Because by the time we finish the lap, there's going to be a certain, it took us a certain time, let's say a minute 24. If it's smaller than what application data remembers as the best lap so far, or application best lap equals 0. Why do I need this or? The first condition is I beat my record. What I did now is better than the best lap I did before. But What if it's the very first one and there is no best lap, or the best lap is 0? In that case, no matter how badly I do, it's still my best lap, right? My first one will be my best one because there's nothing else to beat it. So it's either if we beat whatever we did so far, or it's our very first. In both cases, I'm going to say, hey, application best lap equals application my time. Here it's just one equal sign because we're assigning. It's like, hey, long live the new king. The new best lap is the time that I touched the finish, the time that I finished. This is like, we have a new record. Now that we're starting a new lap, then we need to reset some things. For instance, application.myTime goes back to 0. We're starting a new lap. Start trigger.setActive true. We're reactivating the start trigger so we can start measuring the time. Then this .gameObject, which is the finish trigger, deactivates itself. And it will be reactivated a couple of frames later when the front bumper goes a couple of meters forward and touches the start trigger, which will deactivate itself and reactivate the finish trigger. And none of this will be visible to the user because they're both invisible objects. Back here, it means that if we have one public field in the finish trigger script, we need to populate it. And the finish trigger script has one public field called start trigger, and it's going to be start trigger. Or in other words, they're buddies. They're asking, oh, which one, who's my buddy? Who am I going to enable when I disable myself? Now let's read. Right now we're pretty much done, but testing. So now if we complete a lap, we should see the lap count go up by 1 and the best lap time. The only problem is that to test it, we actually need to complete a lap, which is not that easy. Let me show. If I try to complete a lap, there's, a very good chance that on the way to completing my first lap, I will fall a couple of times, which is also a good way of testing it. See how the finish trigger is enabled and the start trigger isn't, but when we reload the scene, we're going back to the start trigger being enabled and the finish trigger disabled, and we're ready to, and our count has reset and it's like running again. But I'll say it again, in order to see if the lap count and the best lap are updating, I actually need to successfully finish a lap, which is not that easy. So we're going to do a developer's cheat. So, step 30. Let's do a developer's cheat so that you don't really have to complete a lap to see if the count is showing. What we're going to do is create a cube as a child of whole track, and we're going to call it, unapologetically, developer's cheat. We're going to give it the following transform. Let me move it. I think you will see the point in a couple of seconds and why it's a cheat. So one more part, one more child of whole track. Its name is developer's cheat, and its parameters are going to be 25 meters to the left, 101.2, and that would put it right on top of almost all the track parts we got now, and 50 meters in front of us. And no rotation, but look at how much we're scaling it. It's going to be 80 meters wide and 150 meters deep. And here it is. Why is it not going? Oh, not 10.2. That's why it's not showing. It's 100.2. Now look at what we just did. We created a false floor or an extra floor on top of our whole track. Something we can drive on pretty carelessly without falling into the ocean. So that means that we can drive through this gate and immediately do a U-turn, come back, and pass through the gate again and simulate what it looks like finishing a lap. And that's exactly what it says. Give the developer's cheat box collider, the physics material road, so it'll feel like we're driving on the road. So it's one more kind of road. So box collider, physics material road. Otherwise, we might slide off. And the material track one, just so it doesn't look like, too bland. Also, if we don't give it some kind of texture, it'll be hard to see, the driving. We discussed that before. So I'm gonna give it the track, the material track, material one, just like the the regular track parts. Here it is. I'm not going to worry too much about, I'm not going to change the tiling or anything. I just need something that I can see myself driving over. So now it looks like a new floor above the real track. So that means that we can test. Here's how I want you to test before you say, oh yeah, I finished this. Test in Unity where the developer cheats in at least 3 ways. First of all, completing a cheat lap successful, just turn 3 times to the right after the gate. Then falling into the water outside the developer's cheat to see if it's resetting, and then trying to beat my own record at least once to see if the best lap updates. And that's what I'm going to try to do. So let's see. This is like, the testing part. I'm going to make the game window a little bigger, so I can see what I'm doing. And let's see. Okay, first of all, I'm gonna... something is stopping me. Let's see what it is. Developer's cheat. Is it too high? Yeah, it needs to be 100.02, I believe. Let's see. No. What I'm going to do is stop this tutorial. Is probably one little number that I'm missing here that's preventing me from opening those doors, and I'll dedicate the next part 19, just to testing.